Buongiorno. Today I'm gonna talk about Galileo Galilei, and basically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use him as an example to demonstrate, or I guess provide or support our assertion that Italy has remained at the forefront of scientific innovation throughout the modern ages. And I'm gonna start, kind of back in the 15th and 1600s. But anyways, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about five categories that include the contributions of Galileo, and they are astronomy, scientific method, mathematics, physics, and technology. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give kind of quick summaries of each one. I'm not going to say all of his contributions because there are many, and that would take a long time. Probably bore y'all. Anyways, so I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to summarize what these contributions mean, and then we're going to move on to the next video, I guess. Okay? So, Galileo Galilei. Let's start off with astronomy and his work with heavenly bodies. Galileo did a lot for astronomy. You know, he discovered three of the four satellites or moons, as most people call them, that were orbiting Jupiter. He discovered the sunspots on the sun, and an interesting fact that I just want to throw in here is that Galileo was actually one of the first intellectuals to discover that the Milky Way wasn't a cloud, of gas, a nebulous. It was actually, a bunch of densely packed stars, and that was one of the most important contributions that he had. Another, or I'm moving on to the next category now. I'm just giving you bits and pieces. Now the next category is technology, and Galileo, of course, we know had a lot of inventions. Probably his most popular one is the telescope. The funny thing is, Galileo didn't actually invent it. It was invented by another man, but he made so many modifications and changed it so drastically that it was completely different from the telescope before, which was mostly just used for navigation and on the sea. He was the first to use it for astronomical bodies, and the original telescope was only maybe 3 times magnification, which isn't much, but by the end of his life, Galileo had modified it to about 30 times magnification, which was a drastic difference. Other technologies that Galileo did were his work with something called the Galileo escapement. And basically, this is kind of like the device behind the whole pendulum clock and how it works. I'm just going to mention that later in the physics section. Another invention that Galileo did or made was the something called a military compass, which is used by gunners and surveyors, and this helped a lot with navigation and accuracy in firing. Now, the scientific method. This is kind of a broad category, but it's important to mention because Galileo did a lot of things to change things in that field. One example is that he was really the first one to separate, or maybe not the first one, but the most important, founding father of this idea of separating religion and philosophy with science, which is a big deal. That changed a lot. Y'all know about the Inquisition and all that. So this was a big deal. Other scientific methods that Galileo did was he was the first to state and prove that all natural phenomena could be explained, or all laws of nature could be explained through mathematical laws. Furthermore, he was kind of the first, one of the first modern thinkers to do kind of a cross-discipline between, theoretical and experimental physics along with mathematics, and kind of tie them all together rather than treating them as separate fields, because they have a lot in common. And this is what allowed him to, be so great. Now the next category is physics, which is probably his broadest, category that he contributed to. And some of the contributions Galileo made to physics were, that one of the most important was that of relativity. He kind of set up the groundwork for all of Albert Einstein's work, and basically, kind of in a nutshell, he calculated through different, like by observing motion and speed, that there's no absolute rest or absolute object. Everything's relative. Speed and all that is relative. to something. Other contributions in physics include his work with parabola and how that he could explain a parabola mathematically. How everyone knows the x squared thing, but he could also explain it in its physical you know phenomenon manifestation, how that was it had to do with speeds and acceleration. I'm not gonna get into that right now because I don't even know that much about it. No, I'm just kidding. I do know a little bit, just a little bit. Anyways, other physics contributions that Galileo made was this one's really important. That he was the first person to prove that bodies of different masses actually have the same acceleration in vacuum, which is really debatable back in back in that time, because that idea started by Aristotle, or an idea started by Aristotle was that um, objects of different mass have different acceleration in vacuum, which Galileo disproved, and that was a really big change for his time. And now the final category is mathematics, and basically, I'm just gonna do a couple contributions that he made. One's really interesting. It's called Galileo's paradox, which basically means or is that he devised a way of making perfect squares out of every number, even though every number doesn't have a perfect square, which is really interesting, kind of food for thought. If anybody wants to go look more about that, it's pretty interesting. Another thing that Galileo did was that him, along with Newton, was kind of like founding father of calculus, and that's how he devised explanations for his all physical phenomenon. Like I said earlier, all nature can be explained through mathematical equations, and these mathematical equations became known as calculus, basically. And that's really the end of the categories that I just mentioned, kind of little pieces of his contributions. There's a lot more. There's more on the project that I'm showing that you can read. But basically, what I did this for was to show Galileo's far-reaching contributions into modern science at that time. And that's usually when we start thinking about modern science, is the 16 and 1700s, kind of along with the Enlightenment and Renaissance. And this proved that, or this, Galileo is an example of the idea, or our assertion, that Italy has remained, at the forefront of scientific innovation throughout the modern age. And as we go on, Nathan and Matt and Drew are going to show you some other examples of them. I hope you enjoy it. All right.